If I look at the biggest mistake companies make today is they don't understand the customers, they don't understand how they use their stuff.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle, now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts, costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the unbreakable relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving. Today our guest is the one and only Reed Holden. Here are 3 things you want to know about Reed before we started. He is truly a luminary in pricing. He's been in pricing since 1987. What is that, 33 years if my math is even close? He co-authored the 2nd and 3rd editions of the book Strategy and Tactics of Pricing, a book that I used when I taught at Ohio State, and so I practically memorized it. And in 2002, he founded Holden Advisors. They're still going strong, but he's trying to figure out how to actually retire. Welcome, Reed.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here, and I'm hoping everyone is well.
Oh, me too. Me too. So how did you get into pricing 33 years ago?
I had decided to try college teaching. And, you know, part of that is you got to get your union ticket, which is the doctorate. And I decided to get the doctorate at Boston University. And there was a junior faculty member who had just started there by the name of Tom Nagel. And he needed someone, when he published his first book, he needed someone to write the teacher's manual. So I started out a relationship with Tom, and it turned into a strategic pricing group, and we had a heck of a ride together.
Nice. And so you've been in pricing pretty much your entire career.
Actually, not entirely. Before that, I was in sales management, marketing management.
And so it kind of makes sense that Holden Advisors, at least what I always believed, was you guys spent a bunch of time working with sales teams, trying to figure out how to get sales teams to capture more value. How did you get into that whole idea that says, I'm going to go, and what did you actually do? Teach salespeople, or what was that relationship like?
So it was interesting. I just said that I started out before I went into teaching and pricing in sales and sales management. And I made a conscious decision to get away from sales because it seemed to me that there were a lot of people doing it, and I enjoyed marketing. I subsequently enjoyed pricing. And we had published a book, the Pricing with Confidence book, in 2008, just in time for the Great Recession. And after, I think, a year, we got a call from one of the very large consulting companies that was having problems with their pricing. And, you know, my first reaction was, you're a big consulting company, what have you done? And they sent me a 300-page report about what they were supposed to do. And they came back, so I asked them, what did you do from this? And they said, nothing. So I agreed to get on to Sydney, Australia, and you know, interviewed a lot of the partners, tried to understand the problem, and I realized they didn't have a pricing problem. They actually had a negotiating problem. And it just so happened that my academic research was on procurement people. I had been a procurement person, and we were able to come up with a very simple model for them to think about to stop losing price in what we call the last mile of pricing, which is the sales, and in this particular case, the partnership channel. And that led us to negotiating with Backbone, and we now do an awful lot of actually online training now with salespeople, and we do an awful lot of coaching, which is a blast for me.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I love both of those books. They're fantastic books. Our listeners, if you haven't read those yet, they're well worth it. Very interesting. Very interesting.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. So how do you think pricing has changed in 33 years since you've been in it?
Much more use of software, which is there's a yin and a yang to that, Mark. There are good things and there are bad things, but a lot more companies have adopted software. A lot more companies have adopted analytics, which gives them the ability of controlling price better.
And I was waiting for you to say, but it also.
I didn't need to do that. I knew you were going to say that. Yeah, so what you want to do is you want to hear the other side of that. I stay with, I think that the analytics is great. The problem that we see with the pricing people is they don't understand the engines behind the analytics. The engine is generally a regression analysis, which is in fact a fairly simple yet elaborate statistical technique that people can figure out in about 15 minutes if someone trains them how to do that. And if people don't understand the software and the methods they're using, they're prone to problems. You know, we had one company that adopted software and they found out that the software was giving the salespeople who gave discounts more discounts, and the salespeople who didn't give discounts fewer discounts. And you know, I was at one company. You know, we work with a lot of guys that do this stuff, and I was at one company and they were telling me how great their pricing was, and with this new software, and you know, big name software company, and there were about 50 people in the room. And I asked the guy, okay, so what's your R squared? Now, if you don't know what the R square is and you're using the software, shame on you. R square is how well the plot describes the data. And his R square was 0.26, which said that it was a random plot. And I laughed at the guys and I said, come on, guys, you got to get better. And as a point, this particular division, they were part of a $140 billion corporation. This particular division had 4% of the revenue and 20% of the profitability. So you can't, you know, criticize them, but they didn't understand the tools that they were using. You understand the tools, especially in today's world, you understand the tools, you know how you have to change those tools to accommodate the new world.
I got to say, when you told the story about giving bigger discounts to the salespeople who give bigger discounts, just instantly it's like, oh yeah, that's obvious, isn't it? Right? And to our listeners, if it's not obvious, essentially imagine that we're using price as the dependent variable. We're looking at, in general, does China or does the US get a better price? So China usually gets a better price. So when it's time to quote, we're going to give China a better price than we give the US. Now replace China and US with salespeople. And what we just did was say we're going to give the worst salespeople more discount authority. Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we had another case, you know, if you're going to use a software, rule number one is plot the data. Always plot your data. And we had one case where our guys had gone and done the regression analysis, knew the intercept, the slope, and all that stuff. And you know, my rule, so I asked them, did you plot the data? And they said no. So I plotted the data, and we found out that there was an exponential relationship between the input variable and the ability of charging money. That says you do an awful lot more on the input variable, which this company did. And their growth last quarter was 50%.
Nice.
Because they just figured out what the strategic driver was, and you know, the opportunity is there. So yeah, understand your analytics.
Absolutely. Now, my biggest problem with the whole software analytics side is that I think people rely on the data too much, and they forget to think about what does value to the customer actually mean.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, you got to recognize it's possible to use analytics to draw some interpretation of what that value might be, but that becomes a surrogate of the value, and it's a very imprecise surrogate. We just did a technical article for the book that was written in honor of Dan Neimer, and you know, we looked at all the stuff that was going on, and you know, did all the academic research associated with it. And most, you know, to understand value, you have to go to your customer and have a discussion with them to find out how they use your stuff. And if you don't do that, it's a surrogate of value.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Okay, here's what we really wanted to talk about today. Now, I sent you an email that said I don't want to talk about COVID. I'm sick of talking about COVID, and you're like, Yeah. But the world's really changing because of COVID. And so what do you think is changing that we're not going to get back?
Well, I mean, there are some markets that are fundamentally changing. You look at what happened. It was in Wall Street Journal today that the airlines are beginning to recognize that their models aren't working. And, Bob Cross, who was the leader of all that pricing, his son came on and said, gee, you got to change your models. And you got to recognize that the demand structure of that particular market has changed. The demand structure of restaurants, of movies, of the automobile industry, of many industries is changing dramatically. And you have to understand how that demand structure is changing and prepare, as a pricing person, you have to prepare your leadership team for not doing the stuff they did 6 months ago, but changing how they think about using price to accomplish whatever their objectives are.
And so is it just demand? And I don't mean to make that sound, let's talk about airlines for a second, right? I could see 2 years from now, 5 years from now, the world going back to the way it was, in that I'm going to get on an airplane and I'm going to go travel once a week, or, well, actually, I'm not going to do that anymore, but but I could see people doing that again.
Yeah. Well, you got to be careful on that. The trick is to recognize that may happen, but it's not going to happen for a couple of years. So what are you going to do in the meantime? And, we've seen a number of companies that is saying, okay, we ain't going to do anything. We're going to wait till we get back to normal. And they're recognizing, okay, it's been 8 months and we're not going back to normal. So what are we going to do now? And it's, you have to start executing online. And, what we've done is we've changed the way we train to train people online, using, video education, using all the tools that are needed. And and the companies that delayed lost that 6 months of business development opportunity. You look at the companies like Google and the high-tech companies, they're recognizing Google is offering their people to work at home as long as they're willing to take a 10% reduction in salary. I mean, what are you going to do? I'm going to work at home because it's going to save me 10% of my salary to be able to move to Reno rather than having to work out of San Francisco. And, you talk to companies, and the companies are fundamentally changing the way they communicate with their people and especially how they pursue their customers.
Okay, so I could see the working at home thing sticking around. I could certainly see e-commerce, the growth of Amazon, and the fact that I'm buying things online now. I can't imagine me going back to stores, even when they open.
Yeah, and you pick up any retail book, and the first chapter is going to say location, 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 and the whole retailing industry is out the window right now. And I mean, they should have seen that coming 20 years ago when Amazon started making the push, and instead they denied it, and they're paying the price now.
Yeah, so now we might be playing around a topic that I always find confusing in my mind. So let me ask you the flat out question, and then I'll bring it back to what we've been talking about. And that is, what's the difference in your mind between a pricing model and a business model?
None.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So when you think about these changes, we'll talk about your business, and my business is almost identical in that respect, right?
No.
We don't stand in front of rooms anymore. We don't go teach people in person anymore. We do online training. We do Zoom training, whatever the heck it is in that respect. And that's a business model change. But at the same time, you have to understand, how do people value the product? And we're back to, what are they willing to pay? How do they get value from the product? And so is that exactly what you were thinking, or are you going to add more color than I can?
I'll always add more color. That's what you want me to do. You're dealing at a couple of levels. the method of delivering our respective products has changed dramatically. In March, I was supposed to go to a client and spend a couple of days interviewing people and, coaching them. And I realized what was going on. I changed the model. We're now doing the work online, which saves me a huge amount of time and wear and tear on this aging body. And so given that, you need to adjust your prices to reflect that change in your model, but at the same time, you have to accommodate the changes in the customer's needs. And, I mentioned a while ago that we moved to online training. And the expectation from the customer was, well, your costs are going to be lower. Now, they really aren't, because we have to use monitoring services. We have to have event managers where we never had to worry about event managers anymore. And our costs went up, so we raised prices to these guys. We had one case where a company raised prices 100%. Why did they raise prices 100%? Because they realized they had a more valuable product, and a lot of their competitors were up at that new level. So they raised their prices 100%. Did the customers complain about it? Sure. Did they pay it? You betcha.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge fan of using cost to say, here's why I'm raising prices. I'm a huge fan of using it to justify, right? I want to tell you why I raised my prices.
Right. So, yeah, I remember I had a discussion with an editor at Fortune magazine a number of years ago who he made a comment that you shouldn't raise prices because your costs are going up. And I tried to get him to understand what you just said, Mark. That is, if you're going to raise prices, use costs as a justification for that. And too many guys are raising prices and saying, we're raising prices because our value is high. Well, that's just going to alienate customers. You raise prices because we change the product, provide better services to you. There's a cost to that, and customers understand that, and it makes them accept that price change a lot faster.
Yeah, and I always ask people who do that, if your costs go down, are you lowering your price?
Right. You live by the sword, die by the sword.
Yeah, and that's super painful. Okay, so you said that you are trying to retire. What's life like now? How much do you actually work now?
I try to be at 50%.
Oh,
and I'm about at 50%. It works. The being remote has actually helped me because we have a place up in the North Woods of Maine that we actually get video up to, and I do all we'll head up there and do business, and I get to go out and cut wood and mow fields and stuff like that.
Are you up there now? Haven't the leaves changed colors yet?
I am not up there now. 2 questions. I am not up there now. The leaves have, where we are, which is up around Mount Washington, the leaves are actually coming down. There are a bunch of trees that haven't changed and a bunch of trees that have already dropped their leaves.
I figure that's the reason people go to Maine. I've never been to Maine, but I want to go just to see the trees change colors. Yeah,
it's October, early October. It's gorgeous up there.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so back to COVID. Anything else changing that you think that that isn't going to come back? So demand structures, I'm completely with you. I think that makes sense. At least, let's call it the medium term.
Yeah, I mean, the disruption of supply chains that occurred in the first 3 or 4 months of the pandemic have caused a lot of companies to change how they view their vendors. And the right ones that understand the importance of supply chain are open to more strategic discussions with the right vendors. We have, one of the things I do a lot of is coaching pursuit teams, high-level pursuit teams. And, one of the biggest companies in the world, they've been trying to, wrestle these guys to the ground. And the first thing we did was we, stuck to our meeting. We were professional, and the companies come back and they want to have a strategic discussion. And we're setting up the team to be able to do that remotely and coaching them how to do that. Now is a great time to work with salespeople to execute price better, make them not prone to listen to procurement people who are all asking for discounts right now. Understand the value that you provide, enhance that value, and move beyond procurement people to have better discussions with senior executives at your clients so that you can form a true strategic partnership. That is where you trust each other, you charge them fair prices, and that, by the way, is a sustainable relationship strategy.
Okay, I love what you just said, but I also like it when I get confused on how I would handle something. And so let's assume that I could form a really strong strategic relationship. What that essentially just said was you as my client now have a higher willingness to pay for my product. And so that almost implies that I should be raising prices as I get more strategic with you.
No, the word I used was fair.
I heard that, yes.
Yeah. I mean, a common thing, this is a common problem. If you look at the way most industries work, they take their biggest customers, they charge them their lowest prices, and they call them strategic. That is, by definition, not strategic. And what they do is they have loyal customers where they keep raising their prices to. And they wonder when those loyal customers when they get acquired, when they finally get smart and check the competition, they find out that they've been hosing them for the past bunch of years, and they leave drastically. That's not a strategic relationship. Strategic relationship is, listen, I've got a cost structure I need to make some money on. The accounting guys have figured out, the accounting guys have a philosophy they call the 22-25 rule. And that comes out of Bob Kaplan's work on activity-based costing. And the 22-25 rule says that if you look at things properly, 20% of your customers give you 225% of your profitability. And chances are those are not your big customers. The big customers bring down your profitability. So a strategic relationship is one where you have, you take care of each other mutually. And that means you're able to get a fair price for your products. And, procurement people haven't figured a lot of that stuff out yet. And that's why it's a great time now to start doing that.
Yeah, so I love that, but I always teach, and maybe I've been wrong for my whole career, I always teach I want to charge what my customer is willing to pay. The problem, I mean, that's what we wrote in 2 books. That's what we wrote in 2 books. See, I learned something.
But that's the point. We wrote that the first book was published in '93, and we did a couple of follow-ons. There have been 3 or 4 follow-ons, and that's what that book says. But you can't. Willingness to pay is a problem because it's an issue of what they call framing. Framing is how people think about the relationship. Relationship customers want to trust you, and they're going to trust that you take care of them. If they find out that you've been hosing them, you're going to lose them as customers. I mean, the banks did that with the fees. The airlines did that with their fees. So what you need to do is you need to be fair in your prices with them, and that's what guys like JetBlue and Southwest Airlines do. So a you can charge them what they're willing to pay, but you've got to recognize that willingness to pay is a changing number as people become smarter. And over time, people get smarter. And anytime you rely on having dumb customers, you're going to get in trouble with it. You have to assume your customers are smart and they're going to know what your pricing is to other people. You do a pricing plot and you see a customer that is buying, $1 million worth of your stuff and they're paying 50 cents a pound, and another customer that's buying 1,000 pounds of your stuff, bucks of your stuff, they're paying 10 cents a pound. In the information age, customers find out about that. It's not an issue of charging willingness to pay. It's an issue of recognizing that you may have a better understanding what is fair than the customer does. And the rule is that if you have a loyal customer, You've got to take care of them, not only with your service, but also with your pricing.
Okay, I'm having a great time with this conversation. One of the things I usually always teach actually is price segmentation, charging different customers different prices based on willingness to pay, but never ever use loyalty as that segmenting variable, right? We do not want to charge our loyal customers higher prices because by definition, they'd be willing to pay us more, but that's not, the lifetime value of a customer says, look, that's stupid. Don't do that.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is two things as usual. The issue of loyalty and segmentation. So let's talk about loyalty first. You're absolutely right in what you say about loyalty. You don't segment based on loyalty. But within a particular segment, you've got to understand who your loyal customers are because you have to treat them differently. Just like you have to understand how your price buyers are different, how your value buyers are different, and how your poker players are different. So that's the first thing. The second thing, the whole issue of segmentation is being turned on its head because companies are beginning to recognize that the more we segment, the more we're aggregating dissimilar behaviors. We had a client in the telecommunications industry, and they had 5,000 segments. And my initial reaction was yours. Yeah, sorry, it's not going to work. We got to remove the number of segments. And what we realized is we couldn't do that. I mean, they truly had 500 different groups of customers based on geography, based on geodemographic information, based on behavior, based on the package they got. So what we had to do is we had to use a pretty sophisticated modeling method to take a group of, I think they have 5 million customers. So take a group of 20,000 customers, who lived in East Oshkosh and had a multi-unit package with very high-speed internet. And they had to understand, if we decided to charge more for that high-speed internet, how are they going to behave? And you don't do that by changing the price to 20,000. You do that by changing the price to 200, see how they behave, and that informs what you need to do. It's called cohort analysis. We call it cohort analysis. And the modeling technique is stochastic modeling. So.
Yep, I agree completely with everything you just said. That was pretty awesome. And in the world of subscriptions, they're doing a lot of cohort analysis, which is nice.
Yeah. I mean,
Reed,
I'm amazed. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm guessing that we're probably over time because I'm having so much fun with this conversation. But let me wrap it up with one last question, and feel free to talk for hours. So what's the one piece of pricing advice you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
Whoa. You got to understand your customers and how they use your stuff. I mean, if I look at the biggest mistake companies make today is they don't understand their customers. They don't understand how they use their stuff. And, people are going to go back and say, oh, we do research that tells you that. Nah, the research doesn't tell you that because, we did work a few years ago in, digital pathology, and they had at least 2 feet of research. I'm serious about that. And that research missed a very important driver of value that we're able to discover in 2 phone calls with customers. It identified a source of value just because the guys thought it was a source of value. They researched it, and the customers agreed with it. And we found that it really wasn't a good source of value compared to the other stuff. Know thy customer. It's the best advice. If you don't know your customers, yes, rule number 1, know your customers. Rule number 2, if you don't know your customers, go back to rule number 1.
Yeah, go talk to them. One of my favorite things to do when I start an engagement with anybody is ask them, what are those value drivers? What are those most important things? And then go out and talk to a half dozen customers and tell them what their customers just told them. Right?
Yeah.
They're not the same thing.
No. Now, we find that there's about a 50% overlap We actually did I mentioned the article we did with Dan Neimer. At the end of this, if people want to reach out to me, we can send them a copy of the article. We can also send them the executive copy of the article, which leaves all the boring stuff out of it. But yeah, I mean, it's not hard. If you do it, it's very insightful. And if you don't, you're destined to fail.
All right, Reed, fabulous conversation again. Thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
I respond to LinkedIn. The absolute best way to reach me is my email, rholden, RHOLDEN, at holdenadvisors.com.
Advisors. I like the way you say that. So it has an O. All right. Thanks, Reed. Episode 97 is now finished. Would you please leave us a review? These are very valuable to us. They help other people find our podcast. We got one from TSS, says Pricing Perfection, a great podcast for people just starting out in pricing through to seasoned professionals. I learn something new every time. Thank you, TSS. Don't forget to join our free community at championsofvalue.com. You'll find that at community.championsofvalue.com. That's where I post all of my free content, memes, blogs, videos, podcasts. And as always, if you have any questions or comments about the podcast or about pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.